In this video essay, I will analyse BIRDMAN and the way that the sound design helps the nearly one-shot film flow between different rooms, scenes and time jumps. BIRDMAN is an impressive piece of cinema with an hour and 40 minutes of the film running without a single visible cut. Most applaud the cinematography for this feat. However, the sound design plays a huge role in making this feel natural and making the large set that we move through feel real. The sound design in BIRDMAN is always from the audience's perspective. When the camera moves through different rooms, the audio does the same. Watch this scene transition where Regan and Laura have just had a conversation backstage. The scene transitions to later on in the day at the first preview of the Broadway production. J-cuts are used here and throughout the film as the camera moves through the theatre to the next scene. Before the scene between Regan and Laura has ended, we hear the dialogue from the stage indistinctly. We only realise what this is once we move closer and it is revealed to us that time has passed and the actors are performing. Initially the dialogue is quiet and panned centrally. As the camera turns a corner, the pan moves left and the volume gradually increases. A reverb effect has been used here to simulate the dialogue echoing through the corridors of the theatre. The effect gradually changes as well, most notably when Regan enters the stage, as the acoustics of being on a large open theatre stage are different from the sounds reverberating down the hallways. The dialogue on stage still isn't entirely clean, and there is still a reverb effect to replicate close-up dialogue in a large echoey room. Here are two reverb effects, similar to the dialogue heard on stage and from the corridor, that I created using the Pro Tools Deverb tool. In the corridor, I set the pre-delay to 38 milliseconds and decay to 2.2 seconds, setting the mix to be 100% wet. To change the effect for dialogue on stage, I lowered the pre-delay to 25 milliseconds and the decay to 713 milliseconds. The biggest change in the effect came from simply lowering the wet-dry mix to 33%. What this does is make the dry signal more prominent than the audio effect. This makes it sound cleaner and more up close while still keeping a slight echo. The film's director, Alejandro G. Iñárritu, and sound designer, Martin Hernandez, were very particular in getting the right effect for each room, Hernandez has said in an interview with Soundworks Collection. It's not just the distant echo of the onstage dialogue that brings the camera movement to life. What really brings the audience into the reality of moving around the theatre from the perspective of the camera is the close-up Foley and sound effects from the action backstage, starting with the sound of wires being coiled that pan from right to centre and back to right as we look at Sydney, the backstage assistant. We also hear Regan's footsteps and clothing rustle panned appropriately, the clatter of other stagehands moving scenery. Backstage chatter panned to the left can be heard as we move past the stairs. We hear the sound as a bottle of gin is handed over and the close-up clean dialogue between Regan and Annie, the woman at the side of the stage.
First preview tomorrow. Here we go.
I will never get that image out of my head. Right before he did it, those eyes, they were so sad and lonely. Did you have to treat him?
Music out.
What did I do?
34, 35, ready.
He was in terrible shape. His head had swelled up. It was twice the size of a normal head.
He's incredible.
This all adds to the experience the viewer gets of actually walking around the theatre and being the camera. Interestingly, this was not always the plan, Hernandez told Soundworks Collection.
And we started cutting in the normal, usual way to cut. I realized that it didn't belong. So what I started trying to work was moving the elements. So rather than cutting backgrounds as backgrounds, let's try to grab the sound, make it move in the space, put it in a moment where it really belongs, and then lose it.
With the film appearing as one shot, the cinematography can't rely on a shot-reverse shot setup for dialogue scenes. As a result of this, the film often relies on off-screen sound to inform the viewer of the action. An example of this is when Sam and Mike are talking on the roof. Sam walks to the door and we follow her. Obviously there's the usual sound effects of her footsteps and her hand touching the wall, but what's interesting is the audio of Mike. When he says truth, we hear it panned behind and to the left. It sounds distant. We hear his feet shuffle, and when he repeats the line, his voice is closer and louder.
Truth or dare?
Truth?
No.
Truth.
No.
This tells us that he has moved towards Sam. Sam walks inside and down the stairs. There is a reverb effect on her footsteps to replicate the echo of the stairwell. As we follow, the street ambience is faded out, and there is a slight delay before the door shuts. We hear two pairs of footsteps on the stairs now. Mike's footsteps have a different, more echoey reverb to match the distance behind Sam. From this, we know that Mike has hesitantly decided to follow, without his appearance on screen for a full minute. As they walk down the stairs, we also see another example of how the sound design aids with the issue of the film appearing as one shot. There is a moment of complete darkness. This is where a cut occurs. The sound of echoey footsteps continue, and the audience believes that the camera has followed them the whole way. If you listen to this time-lapse scene, you can really notice the attention to detail in creating a realistic soundscape. As Riggin walks down the street and sits down, we can hear sound effects such as Riggin's footsteps, cars driving past, and the bottle of whiskey in his hand. The ambient sound in this scene really brings you into the street. You can hear a distant car horn, distant chatter, a tin can being kicked, an announcer at a train station, a lorry reversing, and a bicycle bell. When we pan up to the building, a time-lapse begins and the sound changes. The audio isn't sped up, like the visuals, but instead fit the time of day. Gradually the sounds of the street fade out one by one, starting with the chatter and cars driving, then the lorry reversing, until we are left with the train station announcer, which goes on into the night, just stopping before it turns light. As it gets lighter, city morning ambience gradually begin. We hear the hum of a boiler, children chatting, birds whistling, someone sweeping the street, and distant building work. A click syncs up with the lights turning off. This is a good creative way to match the sound with the time-lapse, but is also a great technique for informing the viewer of the time of day that the time-lapse finishes. We can assume it's 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, since there are children on the street, possibly going to school, but that construction workers and street sweepers are already working. In conclusion, the sound design throughout Birdman is extremely effective in immersing the viewer in feeling like the camera is their vision. The left-right panning of the audio matching with the camera and character movement truly brings the audience in. This, along with in-depth layering of Foley, sound effects and ambience, bring each scene to life. The sound design plays a huge role in blending the cuts to make the film seem like one continuous shot, and aids with the difficulties that come with that by creating a vast soundscape to show the action on and off screen. The various reverb effects make the theatre a believable and real place for the viewer. Thanks for watching, and of course, listening.